You're listening to The Next Stop Is with Jane August, where I talk to people who make New York City what it is. Every major city has its own vibe. New York has its own very particular one. Why can I watch a TV show and know it's obviously shot in Canada and not New York City? Sometimes it's the architecture or the size of the streets, but more often it's the signs. New York City signage is uniquely its own. Often overlooked, signage is a craft, and right now in Brooklyn, that craft lives on at Noble Signs, which is a design studio specializing in handmade signage and design. In 2013, David Barnett and Mac Polanka created the studio with a love for the classic signage of New York City. Along with creating new signs, they have an interest in preserving the old ones, so they created the New York Sign Museum in 2019. They save old signs and want to turn it into a resource for historians and practitioners. I visited the museum for the Jane Visits Every Museum in New York City TikTok series, and I was amazed by their story and collection. Immediately, I knew that they had to be a part of the podcast, and today I'm thrilled to talk with David, one of the co-founders of Noble Signs and the New York Sign Museum. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. So what makes New York signs so particular? Like, what makes a New York sign a New York sign?
Yeah, I think there's some clear characteristics that I think define the New York vernacular. I think all handmade signage represents a conversation between a small business owner and a sign maker, and you're going to find a lot of the personalities of those people in that sort of craft bespoke signage. Obviously, when those two people are New Yorkers, their personalities are big, and they often come through in a really clear way. And I think in New York, historically and to this day, obviously, things are done faster than they are in other places. So that speed often dictates the form. And I think the style of New York City signage, to me, defined by clear, direct messaging, bold graphics, primary colors. It's very subject forward. So traditionally, you'll think about, Tom's Restaurant, Joe's Pizza, and restaurant or pizza being like the real dominating force of those compositions. And there's certain just vernacular styles, I think, that are really unique to New York, ways that we paint certain letters that you don't really see other places. But I think really the thing that defines it the most is that speed and the directness, right? It's not fussed over. We don't have as much time to do things maybe as they do in other places. So there's like a natural minimalism that's kind of baked into the fact that you're probably painting or crafting 3 or 4 times as many signs a month as like a shop in a smaller city might be doing.
Like, what's typically the turnaround time for, let's say, like a basic painted sign?
I mean, we get at Noble, we get requests to make signs. Hey, I need the sign in a week. I mean, it depends obviously on the scale of the project. When we're doing huge fabricated neon signs, things like that, you could be looking at a project that takes 6 months start to finish. But a lot of the work we do is still like in the traditional way, just like bang it out work, and it just comes in and it comes out, and maybe it's up in the shop for a day or two, and then it goes out the door.
Oh, wow. So how did you get into the sign making world?
I was working as a graphic designer after college, and one of my closest friends from college is a fabricator, and he was working in film, in art department. And I was working at a record label doing art direction, a lot of illustration, album art, posters. That was sort of what I had envisioned doing with my career. That was in 2009, 2010. So obviously that was like sort of a moment like we're in right now, where there was a lot of kind of uncertainty about where things were headed in the world. And when I started working at the record label in 2009, it was like album artwork was pretty much the primary thing that I was being asked to do. And by the time I decided to leave and do sign making full time, album art had become something that like didn't really matter anymore because people weren't buying CDs. So that shift away from the thing that I really wanted to be doing in that world made me look, I think, to other avenues. I like physical design. I like things that people can interact with. So that's always been something that really speaks to me. And I think there are a lot of those things that I thought, oh, this is the things I want to design when I grow up if I become a designer. Magazines, records, books. I mean, all those things still get designed, but not at the level that they were obviously when I was growing up, or even when I was like still in college, when all of those things were still very relevant. And then all of a sudden, like when I entered the workforce, it was like this, massive shift away from physical media. So signs, I think, it was pretty much happenstance that we ended up doing signs, because basically Mac and I had friends, as everyone does, like when you're in your 20s, like working in bars and restaurants. And one of our friends was a bartender, and he got an opportunity to like buy in as a partner, as like a junior partner on a new bar that his bosses were opening. And like the first thing he said was like, "Oh, we should hire David to do the logo, and then we should hire my buddy Mac to like build the signs." Well, me and Mac, we'd been working together on projects since we were in college. We had thought about trying to start a publishing company. We started a student group at our college where we were publishing like handmade books made by students. So we always had this background of like working on projects together, and it was sort of this natural thing where our friend Luke basically put us in this position where it was like, well, we should obviously collaborate on this, because I'm going to do the graphics and you're going to make the signs. So like, let's make this just like a holistic project where we kind of work together from the beginning on it. And, we knew we wanted to paint the sign, but we had no idea how. And this was in the pre-Instagram age. I guess this was 2010, 2011. The bar was the Fulton Grand in Brooklyn. And we just kind of figured it out like DIY status, and made a lot of mistakes, and ultimately ended up, the bar has since closed, but it was open for over 10 years. And at some point in that 10 years, we had to fully remake the sign because we made so many mistakes, but like it was falling apart. But I think that idea, set us up on this path of like, let's work together. There could be this idea of like, we're doing branding and signage for local businesses, and it would be like a collaboration really between design and fabrication. So that idea was sort of from the beginning, and we basically kind of did that one sign, and then went back to our day jobs, and eventually the same restaurant group decided to open like 2 more bars and asked us to do the same thing, and it led to a few more projects. And by that time, I guess it was like by then, like 2012, 2013, I think we were both pretty disillusioned with our jobs and decided to basically both quit our jobs and try to do this sign thing full time. At that point, I think we still had a lot to learn. I mean, I think I always think, there's so much to learn with craft. And I feel like I'm always like a student and trying to keep learning. But that's when we really like took that plunge in 2013 and decided to make it a full-time thing. And it was obviously not an easy go. It's always tough to start a business like with nothing. It was a bit of like a rocky start, but I think it had the snowball effect of just like the ball rolling down the hill and word of mouth building. And by, I want to say 2015, 2016, we were pretty busy. We were able to like bring on a couple people to help out and start to build a team. And then in 2018, we started looking for like a bigger space to actually build like a real sign shop. Before that, we were working out of the basement of Mac's house in Bed-Stuy. So
that's a pretty like fast, like when you look at the time of like going from one place to another.
Yeah. I think we were in the right place at the right time. I think the introduction of social media helped really fuel the interest in process, right? Mm-hmm. I think I'm not a big social media person, but I can definitely thank it, because I think before Instagram, clients were not asking for hand-painted signs. And I think the reason hand-painted signs and really like all kinds of like craft handmade signage had become so endangered was because when you don't see the process, you only really care about, well, what's the cheap way to do it, right? I think people were naturally gravitating towards cheaper methods like vinyl and LED and things like that. Social media has definitely made people more interested in process, so that's been really helpful, I think, for not just us, but all kinds of craftspeople all over the world to be able to show people like, well, this isn't just the product, but this is how we make the product. And I think that's been really beneficial to sign painting in particular. So there was a lot of resurgence of interest in sign painting. Obviously, also, artists like Steve Powers, Colossal Media, like locally, there were just like some people who were doing things with signs and sign painting at like a level that suddenly sparked public interest in like these traditional types of sign making and sign painting. And I think for us, because Mac and I had different skills, right? Him being a fabricator, me being a designer, we both decided to kind of learn sign painting together.
Yeah, where did you learn? How did you learn that skill? Because you don't have a resource like the museum now to teach you.
Well, luckily my my aunt was a sign painter, and then actually she's a fine artist now, but she had been a sign painter growing up, and my aunt through marriage, and her dad was like a famous sign maker in LA. So she grew up in like sign culture, and when we were first starting out, gave us like a few really good lessons on lettering and gilding, gold leaf work. It was much later, I want to say like 2014 maybe, my grandpa sent me an email and he said, hey, like your mom told me that you started this new business and you're doing sign painting. That's what my dad did and my brother. It was our family business in the Bronx. Well, they were from the Bronx, but actually their studio was in Manhattan in the Film Arts building, I believe on 9th Avenue. I had no idea that was like something that had been in my family history because it was not something that anybody ever talked about. I think my grandpa, he became an engineer, and I think he didn't see that as like something to really celebrate, that his like father and brother had been working artists. I think it was something that he wanted to move beyond himself personally. So it was nothing he ever talked about, but it was a pretty kind of like kismet moment where I found this like personal connection to it. Although I couldn't learn anything from my great grandfather since he'd been dead well before I was born. But yeah, so in addition to that family stuff, then also just, finding books, resources where we could. But I also started taking workshops through Type at Cooper Union. I got to study with some really great instructors there, John Downer, Ken Barber. Those workshops were incredibly formative for me in like learning lettering, and ended up inspiring me to apply to go back to school to the Type at Cooper type design program, which I did in 2021. So I've been really fortunate to have some amazing like mentors and instructors in lettering and sign painting. And in addition, just like through the global sign painting community, I've connected with a lot of people who I could call my peers, but are really people that I like look up to, and I've been lucky enough to become friends with them and learn from them as well. People like Kenji Nakayama, Peter Liedberg, Ed Palmer. Yeah, so it's a really niche field, but that means that you have an instant bond with anybody else who does it. So it's actually like once you immerse yourself in that community, there's actually a ton of resources to pull from, and like a really open exchange of information. I think it is like a big commitment learning lettering. It's definitely one of those like 10,000 hours things. The first like few months, if not years, of like trying to do it can be really frustrating and dispiriting. I think in many ways it's probably like most similar to trying to learn how to play guitar or something like that, where you're just not going to be good. I mean, there are those rare people who pick it up and the first time you're like, wow, like you're already pretty good. But for most people, it's going to be a pretty big slog, I think, to get to the point where you don't think, oh my God, what I just painted looks awful, where it looks like acceptable. And I think one thing one of my mentors told me was that, and I always try to keep this in mind, is that when you're learning hand lettering, your eye is always going to be 2 steps ahead of your hand. So basically, you should always think that your lettering looks like shit. Like that's the right. If you don't think that, something's wrong, because your eye should be able to identify good lettering like faster than your hand can learn to produce it. And that's part of the education of it, I think, is just like learning to see it, right? To see in your mind's eye what a good letter looks like, and then teaching your hand to paint it. So it's like that two-step process. And part of it is just always thinking that, wow, this could be better. So it helps like to put in the hours. And I think once you, like learning an instrument, I think once you do reach that level of even like advanced beginner or intermediate proficiency, you start to find that it becomes really enjoyable, and also even something that gives you a confidence that you can bring into other areas of your life.
And then Noble prides itself on creating classic signage with a new approach. Like, what does that mean? How do you do that?
Well, I think, we're lucky because the classic New York style, I think, is really fresh and relevant today. I think in this increasingly homogenized and sterile world that we live in, right, where there's like globalization and corporatization, and things have this tendency to look really mass-produced. People are naturally drawn to things that have humanity and character. At the same time, we still have a modern eye, so we also like things that are clean and simple and have like a sense of minimalism. Well, if you look at classic New York City signage, it has both of those things, right? It's clean and it's minimal and it's direct in the same way that like 21st century design very much is, where like, everything's competing for our attention, and we need things that tell you really clearly what's going on, and like super detailed work is like generally not the thing that brands are using, right? I think most businesses are more interested in having a clear message that cuts through all the noise. Well, that's the same thing that sign painters were trying to do in 1960s, 70s New York. It's like cutting through all that noise of the streetscape with like a really clear, direct message. But the way that it was made automatically brings in this humanity and warmth. So I think it's actually really prescient to look at New York design in the moment that we're in right now, because it combines minimalism and humanity in such like a beautiful way. So it's actually kind of doing that work for us. I mean, I think in a lot of senses, we're able to do not pastiche, but like to do pretty authentic classic design and have it look modern and fresh, just because of the cyclical nature of like culture and design, where like what's old becomes new again. So I think for me personally, my like favorite era is that like post-war, like 1950s, 1960s period. And I think that era in particular in New York City was like actually really, people were really interested in modernism, right? And that was like this new idea that overtook, the whole world, but like you can definitely see it in New York design from that era. So obviously if you look at like a classic New York sign from 1910 versus 1950, 1960, or like 1980, 1990, all three of those eras of the 20th century, that like mid-century period is probably the one that has the most, that looks the most relevant in like today's design landscape. So I guess that's lucky for me, because that's the period I love to draw from the most. I like things that look classic but not like old-timey. I think we've never, as at Noble, like our aesthetic has never been old-timey. I think we've always been interested in things that look clean and modern, but have that character. So a lot of times what we're trying to do is just give things that 5 to 10% imperfection, that comes from hand and comes from not just hitting print, but actually like making something. So sometimes it's even hard, when we're doing design work, obviously when we're doing branding projects and things like that, you have to take really deep dives. But when we're just, say, designing like a panel sign for somebody, we often don't digitize the artwork, because when you digitize it, it's like you draw it by hand, and then to show your client like a full color comp, you'd have to fully digitize it. And then like you could do that, and then you could output it, and then you could make it by hand. And it's like you start with like the human version, and then you go to like the digital version, and then you go back to the human version, and that works. But I think the client often struggles to see it, because when you digitize it, suddenly it doesn't look like it's done by hand anymore, even if you're like digitizing from like a drawing that you did by hand. So I guess it's often easier to just go, okay, here's a pencil sketch, and we'll color like one little section of it to show you like what colors it'll be. Ironically, it's like easier to picture what that like minimal sketch is going to look like than it is to look at like a digitized version and then imagine what it's going to look like if it's drawn by hand or painted by hand. So I think our process, we try to keep it minimal. I guess not to say, you know, we can add in extra steps if we need to, and certainly like sometimes you need to. You know, like we're doing a project with like Roberta's project that we were doing like with Vornado. Like they're not going to approve things off of pencil sketches because 15 people need to sign off on them. But if we're doing work in like the classic sense, like what I was talking about when we started talking, where it's like, okay, here's a small business owner, and here's us, the sign maker, and this sign is just going to be a conversation basically between two people, right? I think in that sense, you can actually still do it the way that it was done traditionally. You know, in the pre-digital age, people weren't doing 10 revisions and doing like, oh, here it is, like, here's 5 different colorways and pick which one you like the best. It's like you tell somebody, hey, this is what I want the sign to say, and this is the color I want it to be, and then they probably come back with like a pencil sketch with some color notes, just like the ones that we do now. And then the client would say, okay, you know, bring me the sign. Or maybe they wouldn't even do that. Maybe they would even simply just say, this is what I want the sign to say, and this is what color I want it to be. And then like 3 weeks later, the sign would show up on their door. So I think that process, it's not the only process we do, because we're obviously interested in like broader design challenges, and some of those require drafting and revisions and options. But when we do get a chance to do that kind of work, it does have like that same directness. I think you often find there's like a spontaneity to that work that is like very much the characteristic that a lot of the old signs that we've saved also have, where you can tell like it wasn't designed by committee and it wasn't workshopped and like revised 10 times. Not to say that you can't get good design work that way, but it's harder. I think everybody in any design field knows that. Like architecture is like a great example, right? They say it would be almost impossible to build like Grand Central Station today, not just because of the labor and the cost of materials, but because it was like one person's design vision, you know, like and they had the trust of the people who were paying for it. And I don't think you really get that very often now. It's just like it's not the world we live in anymore, especially the bigger budget a project has, the more people need to sign off on it. And the reality is that like beautiful, compelling design work is always going to inspire strong reactions from people. And if 9 people think it's beautiful, one person is going to be like, I hate it. It's hard when you're dealing with design by committee to get big ideas through. You often like sap out some of that purity, I think, from the process when that happens. So we're lucky because, you know, we get to work with a lot of amazing small businesses who really do give us a lot of trust. And I think we're able to do things that people who do design at the corporate level probably would find to like the process to be very, very foreign and probably pretty exciting. Like it's a fun way to work.
Are there other like sign making studios? Is this still like a fairly big industry in New York City, or is it small at this point?
So Noble is fairly unique because we're really a throwback to the golden age sign shop, where you have all of these different craftspeople, different skilled trades and artisans, like all working together under one roof to try to make really spectacular things. I think there's a lot of forces that make doing something like that hard. And I think most people, for example, most people who are really good at sign painting really don't want to touch fabrication because, you don't really need to. Like if you're a great sign painter, you can really live like a very free and like liberated life where you basically can travel around with your paint box and show up almost anywhere and just knock on doors and get work and like make good money. And if you're good at sign painting, you can do that work quickly and proficiently, and you don't have to have like overhead and expenses and payroll and all of this stuff that makes life more complicated. I think for us, one, it's just like born out of the partnership between Mac and myself, and like us having completely different skill sets, but like coming together with the shared goal of like making stuff that's really cool. I think there's a lot of people like myself, like graphic designer, sign painter type folks, but not many of them have like a Mac in their lives to help, like to be the person who's going to like, okay, like how are we going to do this? Like how are we going to take this idea and make it? And also to be like a creative partner, but also a production partner. So I'm very fortunate, I think, to have him. And because our skill sets are different, it was always like a natural evolution to like add more people to the team. And I think that's always just been something that really excites me, is like I love working with a team. I love collaboration. It's part of the reason I love client work and didn't just, focus on doing fine art or something like that. I love the exchange of ideas and like the discourse, and I think it really elevates my, like when I'm doing my work, I find that it's much better when I'm working with other people. Like I'm more interested in the work that results than like the work I would do if I was like sitting in a studio by myself for a year.
You said before, you get to see like the physical reality of what you made too.
Yeah, I mean that's really what it comes down to. I think for us, we have not chosen the path of like, oh, like this is the most profitable way to monetize like our skills. It's more like, how can we make the biggest impact on the place that we live? And like, how can we really, I don't want to sound corny, but like give something back, to the city that we live in, because I think there's such an amazing feeling when you see work that you've participated in at like monumental scale. Like that, like I get chills now just talking about it. Like there's something so satisfying about that. And I know for me personally, that ability to feel like I had a hand in something that truly made like a significant change in our lived environment, right? Like you can walk down the street and see it every day. Like there's that giant sign that we made, not to say that is more important than work that's done at a smaller scale, but I think for us that just really excites us.
Yeah, you can point and be like, I did that.
Yeah.
I did that.
Yeah,
How
absolutely.
many signs do you think you've made that are like living in New York City business right now?
I have no idea.
Like how many streets can you go down and be like, I made that, I made that, I made that, we were part of that?
Like most neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Manhattan, I think I could say that. I wish we had more coverage in, the other three boroughs, but I don't even know how to answer that. Hundreds, yeah.
Are there any favorite signs that you've made?
Yeah, one of the early signs we made that was really special to me was the Pickle Guys in Lower East Side, because that was a business that I grew up going to with my family, and they moved across the street. I mean, it had been Gus's when we were kids, but then it became Pickle Guys, and then they moved across the street. And, that was like, they gave us a lot of trust, and we were able to do something really, really cool with them. That was very early on in the history of Noble. And then Veselka, Roberta's, work we've done with Norm's Pizza, I'm really fond of. There's a couple, like, just family-run, like, bodega grocery delis that we've worked with, like Corner Grocery in Glendale and Rojas Deli, also in Queens, that I'm just really proud of, because I think those, when you work with like a mom and pop business, I think there's always like a really good feeling when they love what you do and you love what you did. Like when you can both look at the work and just think like, wow, that was like, we loved making it and you love the final product. Like that's just like a really good feeling.
Yeah, it's like everyone feels good about it at the end, and that's what it's all about. So, like, besides just hand-painted signs, you kind of make signs of all kinds.
Yeah.
I know you guys do neon work, too, right?
Yes.
I feel like right now we're kind of in this transition out of neon as everyone goes into LEDs. Like, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I think there's a lot of forces that are working against neon signs right now. In a weird way, I think neon signs, there's more appreciation for them now than there was, say, like 20, 30 years ago. I know, there was a huge backlash against neon signs in the like late 20th century. Probably, I would guess in the 70s, when things got kind of seedy and people really associated neon with like, X-rated movie theaters and all this stuff. And like, it's like Taxi Driver and like the neon signs as like part of some like hellish, like dystopian version of New York City. I think my parents' generation, maybe there's a lot of people that saw neon signs as like seedy or tacky. Obviously, that's not everybody. And there's people of all ages that love neon signs. But I think people of my generation have a totally different appreciation for them and really view them in a completely different light than maybe the generation before us. So I don't think there's a lack of interest and appreciation for neon. If anything, it seems like that's at like almost like not, if not an all-time high, like certainly it's as much interest in it as there's been in decades. The problem is the forces of change in society are like really, really powerful. So, the sign industry has completely changed, right, over the last 50 years, going from an industry that was almost entirely like the province of skilled craftspeople and artisans. And then with the invention of the plotter in the 80s and, the introduction of the computer, it really became a totally different type of business, more like a contracting business, where it was like, oh, like I'm not an artist, but I have a printer, so I'm going to start a sign shop. I think that, or I have a cutting machine. I think that mentality became so pervasive in the industry that it really is the industry at this point. And sign making is no longer, in the broad sense, at least in America, is no longer like a craft industry. It's more of like a technology-driven industry. So when we go to Vegas to go to the ISA, which is the International Sign Trade Show, there's like 500 vendors. And this is all business facing, right? It's like people trying to sell you their products that you're going to sell to your clients. There's one booth for neon.
Whoa.
And it's not even dedicated to neon. We went to that booth. It's like, it's France. It's like the people that make the transformers for the neon signs. They also make like stuff for LED. And we go to the booth. We're like, do you have like, can we talk to somebody about your neon products? And they're like, oh, yeah, there's like one guy you can talk to. He's like went out for lunch and it's like this dude comes back with like, a gray ponytail and a beard. And he's like, oh, you're interested in neon, huh? Like, it's literally been erased by the providers. It's an unfortunate thing. I mean, it's the chicken or the egg. I don't know. Can you blame the industry or can you blame the shops that didn't have the skill to use the products? And like maybe that's the industry stopped making the products because people didn't have the skill. I mean, neon is really hard to make and to work with. So it's possible that there just were so many years of sign shops not ordering that stuff because they didn't have someone who could actually do it, that eventually the suppliers were like, well, screw this, we're not going to make neon products anymore. Or maybe it was the suppliers just being like, LEDs are cheap, glass is expensive. Let's just like make it so that it's hard to get the glass, and then people will just switch to LED. And even more broadly, like the neon industry is something of like a parasite of the fluorescent light industry. Like the tubes that neon vendors use are like typically made in the same factories as fluorescent light tubes, which are now all being replaced with LED. So already you're seeing a lot of there are colors of neon that you just can't get anymore. And they're like some of the best colors, like aqua and pink. So it's very dispiriting, and like it can feel like nobody cares, except then you see actually like so many people love neon and they want real neon. It's like the industry wants to phase it out, but the customer actually still wants it and are like actively requesting it, and we're selling so much neon these days. I mean, there's always been a demand for neon since we started the company. So I think it's like, will the industry shift back to neon? Probably not. I think the way the sign industry has gone, it's like it's almost like too late to like say, oh, okay, every sign shop that employs basically like no people who are artisans at that level that like a neon bender would need to be, like, oh, you should all like learn how to do it and then we'll start selling you the products again. Like, it's a little bit too late for that. But I do think there's enough people out there, just like sign painting, there's enough people, like individuals out there who are interested in neon, learning it, taking classes. Like I think, you know, Urban Glass and places like that, they sell out neon workshops all the time. So many people want to learn how to do it that maybe there's a future where like those people are like forming companies that don't exist yet.
Maybe you can have a resurgence like vinyl records did.
Yeah, I think it's totally plausible. The thing that, you know, I guess the tricky part is like, again, much like sign painting, it's like there's so many people out there learning sign painting, but how many of them have the ability to assemble a team that can not just like paint signs, but can like fabricate and install, and like, you know, the signs that we love in New York City, like the classic signs, they're not just painted on walls or windows, like they're built, right? And that's the tricky part with the way the resurgence of sign painting is that like there aren't a lot of shops like Noble. There's a lot of amazing sign painters working today, but most of them don't have access to the same teams and like fabrication install partners that the sign painters who were working 50, 60 years ago did. And it's the same thing with neon. You know, I think most people who learn neon, they're probably most likely going to be bending like window neon and like interior mounted wall neons. And there's nothing wrong with that. That work is amazing, but it's not the work that has a dramatic impact on the lived environment the way fabricated neon signs that are big, that are like 50 feet wide and like have like channel letters and like painting on them. It's the fusion of crafts is really hard nowadays. I think that's, again, like what we've tried to do with Noble is have so many different craftspeople with different skills all working together under one roof. Designers, fabricators, installers, like all these people who all bring something to the table. It's almost like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. So it's hard to imagine a world where there's like hundreds of shops doing that, because most people, the reality is like, yeah, most people who learn sign painting or learn neon, they don't want to sign up for that. It's too much work, and I don't blame them. Like
turning into a career is like a lot of work, and making a business and turning that into a whole operation.
I do hope that Noble inspires people to do what we're doing and to set up shops like Noble in New York City and other cities in America and other cities around the world. Like, I always get excited when I meet a sign painter who's like working with a fabricator. I just think because you just have the ability to make so much more impact when you can make a 30-foot wide panel sign and install it on a building.
With Noble Signs, you created the New York Sign Museum to preserve the sign and the history. Like, what inspired its inception? At what point were you like, we need to make this a thing?
From the very beginning, when we started Noble Signs, the idea was not to just do Mac and David's creative sign company. The idea was like, let's make a company that pays homage to the disappearing style of New York City and the place that we live and we love and we call home. So we always were like looking around us to try to inform the work that we were doing. That obviously like naturally led to trying to save some old signs. There's so much you can learn from getting up close with something. And one thing that's interesting about signs in particular is that we typically, the way you interact with them is from a distance. It's always like a joke. Every sign we take down, you go, wow, it looked a lot smaller on the building. They do. They look a lot bigger on the ground. It's really hard to get a true sense of something, even if you're staring at it for like an hour. But if you're 20 feet away from it, it's hard to get to like learn from it in the same way that you can by getting up close. So we tried to start saving signs just really to study them, and obviously also to keep them from being thrown out if we thought that they were really cool. And when we were first starting out, like there were just still a lot of signs, and people would hire us to install a sign, and we'd come and there'd be an old sign and they'd be like, oh yeah, can you throw that out? Yeah, sure. And we just keep it. And I guess that kept going until it was like 2018. I spent a lot of time kind of lobbying my business partner. We should take the time to go like take down this old sign and like, you know, we should take resources. Basically, that's what we're doing, right? It's like we're taking resources from a for-profit business and putting them into something that is like a passion project that has no monetizable end in sight. So there's always been a push and pull there of, well, how much resources can we devote to it? Is this something we can invest money into? So that's when I started thinking about the idea of maybe it's a nonprofit, because, you know, I asked myself, well, is this something that we're trying to monetize? Are we trying to become like a side business of resellers? Part of what we do is like resell cool old signs. No, because I'm way too attached to them. Mm-hmm. Even more than the signs that we make. I think the signs that we save, I feel, are so precious that I never wanted to like imagine selling them. And like that was the end goal. So it was kind of like, it has to be a nonprofit, because why else are we doing this? We weren't doing it so that someday Mac and I could buy like a mansion and fill it with old signs where no one could see them. We thought we were saving them not just for ourselves, but for everybody, right? For the community, because it's our shared history. It's our collective memories. So how do we activate that? How do we make that project something that people can actually interact with and engage with, and keep the signs accessible to the public? So the idea of starting a museum was kind of just like the natural extension of that. We've been really fortunate the last year to get a lot more interest in the project. We opened the space to the public for the first time, you know, started hosting tours and things like that. And the response has been amazing, and it's been so gratifying to see that like this thing that we've been doing for like 6 or 7 years, it actually does matter, because people care about it. You know, they do care about it.
It's New York City. Like, everyone loves old stuff.
Yeah, it's true. But there is, I think, especially of the older generation, mm-hmm. there was like an interest more in like leaving the past behind and starting over. For every person that loves an old house or like a vintage car, there's another person who's like, there's probably 5 other people who are like, no, I want to live in like a brand new building and drive a brand new car and all this stuff.
And that's why those people live in Los Angeles and not here.
Facts.
So to get most of your signs, you do sign saves. Like, what is the process of saving a sign for the museum?
Well, it starts with outreach. The hard part is often getting people on board with the idea of why you want the sign. I think, you know, it's New York City. So like you tell somebody, hey, I want this thing that you were going to throw out. And they go, why? How much is it worth? It's a natural reaction. I think we're all, you know, we have that guard up as New Yorkers. We don't want to get hustled, right? Mm-hmm. There's always been that kind of dance. The reality is most of these signs are too big to really be collectible in the traditional sense. Like if they were a quarter of the size, yeah, like it would be something you could just like put it on eBay or take it to Brimfield and sell for some real money. But when you're talking about a sign that's 30 feet wide, it's like, what's the market for that? Who's going to buy that? You know? So the reality is that most of these signs are going to end up in the trash if we don't save them. At no small expense either, because throwing stuff out in New York as a business, like I learned that when we moved from a residence to an actual like commercial space in 2018. I was like, wait, you have to pay to throw out your garbage? I thought you just put it out on the street. You know, I didn't know anything about running a business. Like business owners have to pay to throw out their garbage. And when your garbage is like a 30-foot sign that maybe, say it's like a porcelain sign that weighs like 500 pounds, you might be paying $3,000 or $4,000 just to throw it out.
Yeah.
So it really is a value proposition. We're a fully insured sign company. We'll come and we'll take down the sign for free. We'll not dispose of it, but we'll take it. We'll haul it away for free. We're saving you money. So I think that's like the value proposition that we make. But this is really why one of the main reasons we decided to make it a nonprofit, because it sounds good. We could say this is before we ever thought about even like opening up to the public and like having a future dedicated museum, like things we're thinking about now that are really exciting. But when we first started, it was just like, well, this would sound better if we said we're a nonprofit, because then people would go, oh, okay, they're not trying to sell it for money. That's not why they want it. They want it for some other reason because they're a nonprofit. So I think that was a big step for us, getting the 501c3 and being able to say, we're a nonprofit. We do not want your sign so that we can go sell it on eBay. Like, we want the sign for benevolent reasons, right?
We want the sign forever to look at.
Yes, exactly.
Are there any favorite signs that you saved?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Queen Restaurant, that one's really personal to me. I also just think it's one of the most beautiful signs ever. I just love that sign so much. Starlight Deli, that's another one. I think it's just like iconic, beautiful, really unique. It's like we call privilege signs that have like a Coca-Cola logo on them or something. Mm-hmm. They were signs that were like provided to business owners for free or at like a reduced rate in exchange for like you advertising for Coca-Cola or 7-Up or Pepsi or whatever it was. But it's a really unique privilege sign because it's like a huge vacuum form, like custom mold. And it's just a beautiful sign as well. The Essex Card Shop, Jones Surgical Company. Yeah, I could probably go on for a while. So,
how many signs are in the collection so far?
At last count, I was just talking to our collections manager the other day, and I think we have about 150 signs.
Wow.
And about 75 are like full-size signs.
And right now they're all living in the studio.
Yeah, they're all at Noble Signs. The manufacturing space on the ground floor is about 2,000 square feet. And then we also have the second floor, which is our design studio, and also has become like a gallery for the museum. And then we also have the basement as like a storage space. So
I didn't know about the basement.
Yeah.
So there's more in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the basement because we are completely out of wall space and ceiling space to hang signs. Actually, like the number one agenda for the museum right now is to find like a dedicated climate-controlled storage space because we are basically at capacity.
You talk about how some of the signs take a long time to get. Have there been any like really quick acquisitions that they're like, oh, come like now, and you're like, we can do it?
Yes. I mean, sometimes we even miss signs because, you know, the tricky thing is like this isn't our job, right? Mm-hmm. We're running a business and we try to slot sign saves in when we can, but we can't like bump work that is already scheduled to save a sign, even if it's like an amazing sign that we love. And there have been a couple heartbreakers, like ones where we got permission after maybe we were talking to someone for a few weeks and then we get permission and then we say, okay, we'll come in like 2 weeks to get the sign because that's usually like, I mean, for all like install work, we usually do like a buffer of a couple weeks and then we showed up and like the sign is gone.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are there any signs that you like dream of or?
People ask me that, but I don't want to answer because I don't want to like put the like bad karma of like wishing a business would close. Mm-hmm. I don't want any sign that is out there currently. We would be much happier if every single sign we had was still in the streetscape and like all those businesses were still open.
So we need to get space for the museum.
Yes.
What kind of space are you looking for? Like we can make this call to action. Whoever's listening to this and has like a rich dad, let's get a space for this.
We have a vision for a future space that is probably, 10,000 square feet, something like that. I have been referring to it in my head as New York land. It's like a reconstruction of an avenue of old New York, right?
Oh, cool.
Where we rebuild I think in most parts of America, they would call it Main Street, but in New York, we call it the Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like maybe 20 storefronts, like pick 20 of our favorite signs and like actually rebuild like the street that they hypothetically could have existed on. And imagining that space, like not just as like a gallery, but really as like a potential community hub, as a
Mm-hmm.
place, like as a gathering place, as a venue, as a place where people can reimagine things that they do in this context of like this street of old New York.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge part of it. That would probably be like the permanent exhibition, and then obviously like a flex space to do rotating exhibitions that are more themed or, you know, collaborations with other artists, people, institutions. And then I think the hope is that we would continue to have the sign shop exist with alongside the museum. So somewhere in that space, I kind of think of it like maybe like, you know, like Krispy Kreme, and you can see them like making the donuts.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like that thing where like I don't think you'll be able to like walk into the manufacturing space the way
Like,
you are
look
now.
through the glass
Look through the
and be
glass,
like, look at them
yes,
making
and
it.
see how the signs are made. Because I think one thing we've seen with the tours we're doing now, it being in an active manufacturing space is really interesting to people because it activates the experience of seeing the old signs in like such a meaningful way, because you're not just seeing them as like artifacts on a wall, but you're actually seeing the craft. You're seeing people who are trying to keep that craft alive and actually getting to watch them work and make signs in the same style and made the same way as the old signs that you're like there to see. So I think that is so enriching to the experience, and I think it adds so much depth and authenticity. We would like to find a space where the sign shop can continue to exist like alongside the museum. And like with that in mind, also having an education center, resource center. Through the museum, we've started hosting sign painting workshops, and I think that's something we really want to build on when we get this permanent space. I could even see, you know, sign painting workshops, fabrication workshops. There is no longer a sign art school on the East Coast. There used to be two in America. There's Butera in Boston and LA Trade Tech in LA. LA is still there, and I think, you know, very, very popular. Butera, unfortunately, closed a year too soon. I think I'm not positive. I want to say they closed in 2011. And if they had just held on like 2 more years, they would be selling out. You know, that would be one of the most popular programs because there's so many people that want to learn sign painting now. You know, this is sort of just speculative, but I could see a future where we're trying to host even like not just like continuing education, but even like some sort of like certificate program like in sign arts in the museum. I think that could be, it's something that would really help the mission of what we're trying to do, which is to keep this craft alive and to keep people not only appreciating it, but like engaged in the way that it works and the way that it's made. And, you know, obviously there's so many components like I've been talking about. There's design, fabrication, all these different crafts and trades like working together. So it would be very cool to have like a true education program that was holistic for all of those things.
Yeah.
And that doesn't exist, I don't think, anywhere.
But
so.
it will. It will. I believe in it. So like what's the current museum experience? Like if people want to come visit the museum, what do they do? What happens?
Currently hosting 2 or 3 tours a week. We originally were only doing Fridays because obviously being like a business, we're typically open Monday through Friday. We've been doing Friday tours, which are like during business hours, and then recently we have added some weekend tours because obviously not everybody can make it out on a Friday at 2:00. So the experience could be slightly different depending on if you come during the week or on a weekend. But basically, you enter through the sign shop. Our sign shop is divided into 2 areas. You have the fabrication studio and the painting studio. There's old signs everywhere, all the walls hanging from the ceilings, stacked on any steady surface that will hold them. We talk a bit about our craft and our approach, how we make signs, which is something I haven't really talked about today because it's really my partner's side of things. Mm-hmm. But the types of materials we use, like thin gauge aluminum, square tube frames, how we bend metal, things like that. And then we talk about how we paint signs, the craft. You might get a little demo of somebody painting, especially if you come in on a Friday when work is going on. From there, we go upstairs to the design studio and gallery space. And that's where currently we're housing also our like resource reference library. What we do is that's usually like my spiel. I'll talk a little bit about the unique characteristics of New York City vernacular, of lettering styles and sign designs, like what makes it unique to New York. And then I usually put out 10 to 20 primary source documents, books, ephemera, things like that, and give people the opportunity to kind of just get hands-on with some materials and like really look at things, whether they're lettering manuals, trade publications, just bits of like New York lettering, ephemera, things like that. Classic advertising, like advertising brushes and mirrors and thermometers and combs and things like that, as well as we have a collection of about 600 or 700 20th century matchbooks from New York City. And people really love to look at those. So we might be trying to do something like put out like a book or something in the future with that.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
That's kind of mostly what I have. Is there anything else that you want to share?
It's hard to explain what that like personal attachment is to like New York City signage in particular. But I think like to me, when I picture New York, like the New York I knew as a kid, growing up, like the first thing I think of is the avenue, like walking with my grandma down the avenue, and it's like the butcher and the fish market and the bakery, and like it's like everybody knew each other, and the signs represented that sense of community. The idea of like, it wasn't Starbucks and like Chipotle and whatever, like it was like Joe's Bakery and like, Averone Butchers, and like everything was just like tied to a person, and the people were real New Yorkers. And I think thinking about that dialogue, that conversation, and that sense of community, it makes me nostalgic, but it also, I think, it shows us a path to the future. There's a way that we can look at these signs and think about how we can keep New York City special, right? And how we can keep that sense of community alive, even as we're fighting against so many global forces that are trying to like shut it down. And you look at places like smaller cities and places like, or even small towns in America, and it's like they have almost no small businesses left. It's like every business is a chain. It's like we don't want that to happen here. And we're lucky because New York, there's like too many storefronts, right? There's not enough chains in the world to fill every storefront in New York City. So we're lucky for now, but it's like you can't take it for granted. And I think people know that. There's a real grassroots movement to protect small businesses, but it's just like trying to keep neon or sign painting alive. It's you're swimming upstream against the bigger forces of the world. It's like even if that's what the people want, it's not what like the decision makers want. It's not what like the corporations want. So we really have to be steadfast and strong and really have a roadmap for what we want our future to be. And I think in a way, like these signs can help us find that path forward.
That's beautiful. Like that's a great way to wrap this up. Where can people stay connected and find the museum and take tours? And
Sure. If you go to our website, nysignmuseum.org, you can book a tour. You can also follow us on Instagram at NY Sign Museum and at Noble Signs, NOBLESIGNS, and noblesigns.com as well if you want to learn more about the studio and the signs that we make.
So awesome. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. This has been The Next Stop Is with Jane August. You can follow me, Jane, at Jane August on Instagram and TikTok. The Next Stop Is recorded at Brick House in downtown Brooklyn. It premieres on Brooklyn Free Speech Radio. You can listen to other episodes in the same place you're listening to this one.